Hello and welcome to Event Plus activities at the Circular Economy Forum at Harvard. We are talking to people who make the circular economy happen, rethinking how we design, make, and reuse just about everything. My name is Sandra Negron, and I'm a textile development and business consultant. I am currently pursuing a certificate in sustainability at the Harvard Extension program. Today, we will be speaking to members in apparel and education that are at the forefront of the circular economy. First, we will begin with presentations by our three presenters pertaining to how their company or institutions are designing out waste and engaging consumers/wearers in the process. Then we will open it up into a discussion focusing on challenges, opportunities, and consumer engagement in an effort to tackle designing out waste within the apparel industry. It is my great pleasure to introduce our three guests today. First, Matt Dwyer, Head of Product Impact and Innovation at Patagonia. He's coming at us from West Coast, Southern California. Hi, Matt, welcome.
Hi, Sandra, and thank you again so much for thinking of me to represent Patagonia in this very important discussion.
Absolutely, thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Shelly Xu, founder of SXT, a design tech startup making beautiful 100% zero waste clothing. Shelly Xu also participated in our first online event in this past November on the shared economy. Thanks for participating in that. And thank you for participating today.
Thank you so much, Sandra. It's so great to be back, and I'm so excited to be a part of this and learn from everyone.
Yes, absolutely. I look forward to learning about your process. And last but certainly not least, Lynda Grose, chair of the fashion design program at California College of Arts, and she's coming at us from the West Coast, Northern California. Welcome, Lynda.
Hi, Sandra. Thank you very much for including me in this presentation today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And now we'll begin with our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Matt Dwyer. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Sandra, for the intro and the invitation to come speak about this really important issue on behalf of Patagonia today in apparel waste and the circular economy. In the words of Yvon Chouinard, Patagonia is in business to save our home planet, which means issues like this, issues that affect all of society, are more than just ones that impact our business and ones that we must urgently find solutions for. My name is Matt Dwyer. I lead product impact and innovation for Patagonia. So from materials and supply chain, decarbonizing, programs around wastewater, energy, and chemistry, all the way through future innovation platforms and all the different clever ways we can decide how to clean up our mess. So it might not be surprising, we've all seen litter on the sidewalk, but there is waste everywhere, and especially in apparel. And it's not just what happens when a garment is finished at the end of its life, or you're done using it and it's ready for its second life with another user, but there's waste at every step in the manufacturing process as well. So a polyester piece of apparel, like a better sweater, for example, starts as a recycled polyester chip, which is then put through production. It gets spun into a yarn, knitted, dyed and finished into the final piece of fabric that ends up having a pair of scissors taken to it at our finished goods factory. And at every single unit operation of the creation of this material, from the chip to the fabric to the product, there is waste. We've estimated through some of our own individual studies that by the time your better sweater gets completely finished and produced, almost 48% of the material included in that gets wasted through all of these different process steps. And that's on top of the 18% yield loss that we get from just cutting out the fabric into the pattern before it gets sewn. There's also waste in shipping materials. Nobody likes these days getting a box full of plastic bags that their Amazon things come in, or those bubble mailers that we see show up so much, especially in times of quarantine. So waste truly is everywhere, even before it gets to us in the very important use phase. Something that we say at Patagonia is that we have to first measure our mess before we're able to clean it up. And this means shining light in dark places. It means visiting your supply chain every step of the way. It means asking the hard questions about where do those bales of spent fabrics go? Where do those edge trimmings from the different processes go? And then committing to finding a place for it that's not just incineration or landfilling in the worst case. Part of this is developing systems and processes to know where the waste comes from and accurately track it through your process. And also being very mindful through all the steps of our own product creation process. That is circular design thinking, design for repairability, the idea that a Patagonia down jacket's front zipper, when it comes to repair, could take several hours to get the zipper out. Those are the types of problems we're trying to solve. We have a keen focus on pattern efficiency. So when you have a sheet of fabric that you get from your textile mill, they lay a paper pattern on top of it and cut out the shapes that they need. And because that fabric is so impactful and so resource intensive, we want to make the most out of that high intensity ingredient. Finally, these values-based partnerships with our supply chain partners. We want to be in business with our partners for the next 25 or 50 years. We want them to live and walk the same values that we have. And when we enter a hard conversation, whether it's around chemistry, water, installing renewables, or what they do with their waste, we know that we'll have a kindred spirit on the other side of the Zoom call who's ready to make the hard choices and do the right thing. And finally, end of life is something that we all have to plan for when we're thinking about design for circularity. And when I talk about end of life, it's front of mind for Patagonia. Our ironclad guarantees to our customer that we will take back any item that they send us for a quality reason. If it's at the end of his life, we will try and repair it first and foremost. And because of that, over the last 15 years or so, we've developed a really nice collection of old funky stuff that we call the Boneyard. And these pictures are just an example at our Reno distribution center. You can see wheeled luggage that's no longer repairable or serviceable. You can see things like the Smell collection, which is waterproof materials that have delaminated, gotten holes in them, or are not repairable. And every other product that we make, we have examples that have come back at the end of their life. Now they're sitting here because we're still waiting to identify solutions that aren't landfilling. We commit that none of our product will be landfilled and none will be incinerated in the dirty ways. And these are products that are waiting for that future solution to come by. At Patagonia, we talk about the new product life cycle. So of course, first comes reduce. The lowest impact garment is the one that you're already wearing and you're not driving new resources to be extracted to build. Rentals is an alternative apparel economy that we're investigating right now. Second comes repair. Repair has always been a tenet of keeping product in the life cycle for as long as possible. And you see our worn wear truck, for example, which visited a number of college campuses over the past few years, repairing everybody's apparel, not just Patagonia goods, but even some of our competitors too. Reuse is super important, and this is the foundation of our worn wear platform. So we're able to incentivize our customers when they're finished with their Better Sweater, Snap Tee, or any other product of ours to send it back for a true re-commerce model. We clean it, we inspect it, we tag it, and we relist it on our website. And finally, recycling. And recycling is the final eventuality when it comes to the end of life for a garment. That big pile of stuff in the boneyard at a Reno facility, we'd love to see it get recycled, and not just recycled or downcycled, but put into a form where it can turn into a truly high value and durable good. So those are just a few of the things that are Patagonia's approach to circularity and eliminating waste in apparel.
Thank you, Matt. So let's welcome Shelly Xu, founder of SXT.
I am Shelly from SXT, and we create 100% zero waste clothing designs, and we try to make it more beautiful and less costly for people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, also what SXT is working on and what's next for us. So my journey started here. This is my childhood playground in China. But if I go back there now, this is what I see. There's so much textile waste in a lot of the places that I go. So I really want to change this. And I know I'm not alone. Some of us might know this stat, but there's about 92 million tons of fabric that gets wasted every single year around the world. And that's about one truck filled with textile just going to landfill every single second. And so our mission for SXT is to make this number zero as much as we can and as quickly as we can. So the way we think about it is that we turn waste into beauty. So this is actually one of our zero waste jumpsuits that we sold out recently. And we turn waste into profit because we are a business and we also believe that people want sustainability today. In fact, we did some research and found that even if you just look at women in the US who care about sustainability, already and who buy their own clothing. That's like a $43 billion market. And we know that there's even broader appeal. And we've heard a lot of buzz and a lot of great efforts around sustainable fashion. And I know it's a huge opportunity. But what really inspired me to start SXT was this stat here, which made me feel like maybe we still need to crack this problem. So even though there's about 75% of the consumers today really care about sustainable fashion and they talk about how much they care about sustainability, only about 1% of the fashion sales are actually from sustainable fashion today. So there's actually this huge disparity, huge gap between what people are saying and how consumers are behaving today. And so I actually started SXT by talking and surveying over 2,000 people and asking them, why is sustainable fashion or sustainable clothing not working for you? And these are the two answers that I got the most frequently, which is it's too expensive. And also it looks kind of basic. So why would I pay more for a hoodie if I know I can buy a cheaper hoodie, the exact same design somewhere else? And so for me and my team, we start to think about how can we create something that actually costs less. So we start creating prototypes that actually cost 55% less to produce, so it doesn't have to be so expensive. And we start creating designs that were actually getting us invited to Open for Milan Fashion Week. So it wasn't so basic in the design. And we were really looking for approaches that creates a win-win where zero waste or sustainability doesn't have to be a compromise, but it can be an opportunity to actually save cost and enhance design at the same time. And we feel like this could be a really great path. And I know we can't do it alone, so we'll probably be working with brands like Patagonia to think about how we can actually embrace things like zero waste design as a sustainable future. And we actually start by thinking about how do we first make it accessible to as many people as possible, because it takes all of us to make a difference. So we really wanted to create accessible price points, and we wanted to think about how do we make our designs fundamentally less costly. And these were the things we started with. We thought, how can we actually use fabric that would have been wasted, get it for free from our global partners, and then upcycle it and don't waste any of it, so we can end up saving like 75% on material costs. That's what we've been seeing so far. And then secondly, we actually combine design and engineering from the start. What I love about my team and working with my team is that I'm someone who's a designer in background, but I actually have two team members who are engineers. And so we actually from the beginning think about how do we create the most efficient design that are great for scale, great to take apart, and actually really easy to make. So for example, here, this is one of our jackets. It takes 8 edges to make it instead of 56 edges to cut. So we can actually save more than half the amount of work. And that's another huge cost factor that we can reduce. And then, of course, we don't just care about efficiency. We know it has to look good, because we always talk about how if it doesn't look good, no one's going to buy it. And no matter how sustainable your clothing is, if no one buys it, it's just waste sitting there. And so we think a lot about creating designs that are actually good looking. And this is actually the design from the last slide I showed you. And we've been invited to all the major fashion weeks. We actually started this business by putting our designs on Instagram and not telling anyone that it was sustainable, just to see how they would react. And we actually got about 22,000 followers on Instagram. Now we tell people that we're zero waste. And we've sold out our prototypes so far through that platform. But something that we really, really care about is also being fundamentally sustainable. And to us, that starts with labor, the people who are actually making the clothes. One insight that we found was that the countries that are actually most harmed by climate change today are also some of the biggest manufacturing countries for clothing, like Bangladesh. And so one of my teammates, he actually run a local manufacturing facility in Bangladesh where he works with climate refugees. And so we started working with them as seamstresses, and we're paying them about 4 times the local wage to help them rebuild their lives. And that's something we think about a lot. Another thing that we care a lot about is, can we actually design clothes where we can clean the planet with every design? So we thought, can we actually take local fabric leftovers that are going to landfill and use that as a creative constraint to design clothing that can cut down on carbon emissions? So actually what you see here is we actually calculated the average dimension for a denim waste that's around Bangladesh, where we're working with climate refugees. And then we designed it around that constraint to create these jackets here. And they're unisex so that actually the simplicity of this design allows us to hire even the newly trained refugees. We made some progress with our designs and prototypes so far, but something we're super excited about is this opportunity to not just be a product, but a platform, because we were brainstorming the other day and we realized this is such a fragmented, huge industry and it takes all of us to make a difference. So how do we not just create something ourselves, but also become almost like a puzzle piece for others to plug into so we can collaborate together? And so we started using our zero waste design method and combining that with a genetic algorithm that we're now working on, which is a type of AI, so that we can actually apply that to any style and eliminate waste and optimize efficiency with those styles, with any brands that we partner with. And that's something that we're super excited about that's happening next for us. Anyway, so that's it from me. I had this QR code here because it leads to our jacket, but thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you, Shelly. That was really great. Let's welcome Lynda Grose, Chair of Fashion Design at California College of the Arts.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to this panel. This is a great subject. So, full disclosure, I'm a mainstream fashion designer and came to fashion and sustainability while I was working in industry also. So I am in academia now, but still also have clients in the private and public sector. And I came to fashion and sustainability while I was working at Esprit in San Francisco in the late 80s, when the co-founder of the company, Doug Tompkins, along with his dear friend also, Yvonne Chenard at Patagonia, decided to bring sustainability into the company and use the business as an example of change. And at Esprit, what that included was commissioning the Elmwood Institute, a deep ecology think tank, to develop an eco-audit for the company. And I just got swept up in that environment at that time, joined the eco-audit team, started asking questions not just about the operations of the business, but about the product. And to cut a long story short, that culminated in a line of clothing called ECollection that was launched at retail in 1992. And ECollection included lots of things, but keeping with the theme of this particular presentation and waste, over on the right-hand side there, you'll see non-electroplated hardware. And that's as a result of looking at the highly toxic heavy metal waste that comes from the electroplating process and choosing to use non-rusting alloys instead. So that's just one example of waste saving at that time. But the overall question that we were asking was, how can we reduce impacts of our products and bring viable alternatives to market? And I still think it's a really important question, but I think there are really bigger, more pressing questions now in these times of ecological crisis. And the reason I quote this from the Global Fashion Agenda Pulse Report from 2019, which states that sustainability initiatives cannot be implemented fast enough to counterbalance the impacts of the fast-paced fashion industry. The incremental improvements that we had with ECollection just can't keep pace with a growth business model. And let me just outline this just a little bit in a couple of slides. If a company says that 25% of their product is, say, organic cotton, or 25% of a product is recycled, that means that the remaining 75% is not. And in a business model which is required to grow every year, that 75% unsustainability grows exponentially faster than the sustainable piece. And I would say this is what we've been doing over the last 30 years, is actually backsliding on actual ecological gains. So coming now to education, we've been teaching fashion and sustainability at California College of the Arts since 1999. And how do you bring these sorts of big issues into a classroom where 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds who just love fashion and want to change the world, you know, one hemp dress at a time? You know, how do you don't want to depress them, you want to inspire them to join this movement. And we still go over the ecological impacts of textiles with the students. They know what those impacts are, what those choices are. So the program is still grounded on ecological principles and the language of ecology, the language of science and what scientists track. But we also bring that learning in the classroom to life outside through experiences. So here you see students on a fiber share ranch in Bolinas, Marin County, and they're with a scientist who's about to take a soil sample to measure the carbon content in the soil from the regenerative practices on this particular pasture. And so students will remember a great day out, they'll remember a cute scientist, they remember meeting Molly the sheep and feeling the fleece and how greasy it is. And yes, when you take that grease out of the wool in the scouring process, of course, that's going to have a biological impact on the wastewater that reduces oxygen demand to fish. So it brings all that learning to life. We also take them on the Sustainable Cotton Project farm tours in the San Joaquin Valley, which is the most productive cotton cultivation system on the planet. And it's where they meet farmers and scientists firsthand. They get to test some of their scientific language now, but they really learn how difficult it is to transition a chemical intensive farming system to a biological one and meet people who are doing that. But what they also learn when they're down there, again, it's highly productive cultivation system. And they see all the different equipment that's at play on the land, and they see how productivity shapes the landscape, how it's laser leveled even to enable water to run from one end of the field to the other. And they see that massive mobilization of natural materials extracted from the land. And then when we come back to San Francisco, they go to the warehouse of Goodwill Industries, where they see all that waste at the other end. And you can't help then but question our fetish that we have with yielding more, growing more, producing more, selling more, and wasting more. Even designing more comes up in conversations. So we're able to get at those bigger global sort of economic issues through experience actually in the field. And I will add here some of the conversations that come up here. If these items are organic cotton or they're recycled, that's only part of the issue, right? There's a bigger problem at play here, clearly. So another thing that we can do as an educational institution is link with other institutions and do research that goes beyond the confines of what a business would do, you know, deep, slow research rather than rushing something to market. And we did this with Local Wisdom through my co-author, Kate Fletcher, who's at London College of Fashion. Local Wisdom was a 5-year project over which partnered with 7 different institutions to interview people about their clothing and how they used the clothing. So it really gets at material culture, not just the technical aspects of materials, and emphasizes use and tending to garments as much as the craft of making and producing garments. And in this area, ethnography, the language of anthropology and those sort of cultural languages also come into play in the student's toolbox. But it turns out there's lots of sustainable behavior that is in everyday habits of everyday people that we don't hear about because the dominant narrative about sustainability is really owned by the companies. But there's lots of sustainable behaviors that we can talk about later if we think about wearers rather than consumers. So when you do this deep research, one of the insights that comes up that then you can embrace as a central tenet when you're designing is the reason why people purchase more garments is to feel refreshed, actually to refresh the self. And then as a central tenet, you can take that into design ideas as these 2 students did who paired on this particular project. It's called Tattooed Denim. They're juniors, so 3rd year students at California College of the Arts. And what they did was notice how much waste denim was in that warehouse at Goodwill. And they designed a concept where garments would be designed for partial disassembly and lying flat and be laser etched, tattooed to refresh the garment, perhaps refresh the self in ways other than shopping for new goods. So here we've got experimental knit swatches working with cationic and non-cationic cotton, which embed invisible patterns into a garment, which are revealed after over-dyeing later in the sweater's life when someone might be bored with the garment that they acquired, to satisfy a desire for something new again in ways that slow the flow of those materials through the fashion system. So I would just say, as an educational institution, what we like to do is create a space where students are able to problematize beyond what a company would normally do and to imagine the impossible. We like to think that we prepare this new generation to help build a future fashion industry, even though they graduate with the tools for the regular one, the current one. And we emphasize an arc of practice. So students can choose to work for a regular company. They can choose to work for a more responsible company, like the two that are on the panel today. They can choose to be outside the industry completely, but it's important that they're following their values and they know where they are and why and where they want to be. So just to leave on a very positive note with 3 examples of graduates from California College of the Arts Fashion Program. James Zormier is an innovation designer at Nike and worked on the Space Hippie sneaker, which has recycled content and reduces the carbon footprint of the sneaker. Annie Gullingswood is Director of Strategy at Eon, and that's a digital ID company. The infrastructure for the circularity doesn't exist yet. And what they're doing is placing digital ID with the garments so that when they're disposed of, they can come back and be easily scanned and quickly diverted into a resale or recycling stream. And then Corinna Michael over there on the right, her values took her out of fashion altogether. And she's working for Girl Effect in England, educating young women in Tanzania and in other African nations. So completely out of fashion. And I will just leave it with that, with our tagline at California College of the Arts, a future in the making.
Thank you, Lynda. That was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing. It's been very inspiring. Now let's take a deep dive into how we can design out waste within the apparel industry. I would like to open up the discussion and start with our first question. What are the biggest hurdles with designing out waste within the apparel industry? Matt, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you, Sandra. And there's a number of hurdles in addressing waste in the apparel industry. The obvious is that we largely still rely on paper patterns and scissors to cut things out, which inevitably leaves fabric scraps on the floor. We put so much energy into developing materials and developing great supply chains to go along with them. And this waste is waste that we have to optimize at the slightest. The second is that, especially in high-end apparel, there's requirements for things like prints and patterns, the shirt that I'm wearing right now, to match up perfectly. You know, the customer thinks that a sign of a high-quality piece of apparel is that all of the lines match up, that your floral patterns on your Hawaiian shirt, for example, match up perfectly, which on its own can cause waste. And the last is that we have to approach this not just to minimize this yield loss, but also understand that when there is fabric waste, we need to address it, assign it, and make sure that it goes to the right place. If we assume that there is a future with scissors and paper patterns for at least the next however long, we need to be mindful of that waste that's right under our nose. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Shelly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, as a zero waste designer, I'm totally aligned with that. I would say one thing I would add is I feel like another hurdle, and it kind of piggybacks on what Matt said about aligning the prints, is that there's this notion that designing out waste or creating more efficient designs are going to compromise the aesthetics of the design. And I think that's especially the case among luxury designers who have such a clear brand image that they really feel like they need to protect. And I really want to challenge that, because I think for so long, a lot of designers today are trained to think that they should maximize their creativity and not really think about the constraints or not really think about the resources that's required and just design whatever is cool, whatever that's on trend. But I actually think there's another way of thinking about reframing design that is about maximizing beauty under constraint. And that's not an original concept for me. One of the original designs that really inspired me was a traditional kimono from Asia. It's a zero waste design. It's really simple, super minimal. It's timeless. People still love wearing it today. Kim Kardashian tried to, trademark that name because it's still so relevant today. But it's a zero waste design. And the way that it came about was because people were thinking, instead of thinking to Matt's point about how do I create this pattern first, then lay it down, and there's all this waste, that design starts with the fabric as the creative constraint. It acknowledges the resources that we have on this planet, which is limited, and they maximize the beauty and the versatility of that design within that. And to Lynda's point about feeling refreshed as you're wearing a piece of clothing, I think when you design versatility into the clothing, it also allows it to be more sustainable. So I really feel like this is time to really reframe the way we think about design. And instead of seeing sustainability in design as a hurdle, to actually see that as an opportunity to bring it to the future and how you can actually maximize beauty while acknowledging the resources that we have, which is limited.
Well, thank you, Shelly. That was really great. You're right. We shouldn't have to sacrifice design on this sustainable journey, not at all. How about you, Lynda?
Absolutely. Actually, it was Picasso who said, restraints force innovation, the likes of which you can't imagine in advance. And I completely agree. And when we set projects at the college, really an assignment is a set of constraints that then you innovate within, right? So I would say absolutely. And then beauty and the aesthetics of the garment are not limited by sustainability at all. I would say aesthetics is a style choice. So, and then back to your question about, the biggest hurdle with waste, I mentioned it in my presentation. I would say that the biggest hurdle is our businesses as they were developed from the Industrial Revolution are utterly dependent on selling more stuff and primarily on single unit throughput, on selling more individual garments. Patagonia is doing a lot of work on this with, their worn wear items. So if you think of a garment coming through the system, I think what we're trying to do in reducing waste is to slow the flow of materials going through the fashion system, and to slow the extraction from the land, right, of natural resources. And so if a garment comes through and it's used once, then those resources go to waste. It's that linear system. If it's used twice, the same resources create revenue. And they're used, right? So, and if it's used 3 times and it's used 4 times, there's more revenue with the same amount of resources. So back to those constraints around sustainability, they apply to garments, but they also apply to business models, right? Those constraints of finite resources on the planet can force completely new business models that are going to be fantastic and exciting and create revenue that's decoupled from declining resources.
Well, thank you so much. I think that can take us right into the next question. What infrastructure or policy changes do you think are necessary to help amplify the reduction of textile waste or just designing out waste in general within apparel? Can we start with you, Matt?
Sure, and that's a great question. And I'll speak largely to the infrastructure piece. In the United States, we have very much a failing recycling infrastructure for the things like glass bottles and cans that we've been ostensibly trying to recycle for 30 years. And when you think about recycling apparel, whether it's something that you're just finished with and it's the end of its life, your wholly stretched out t-shirt, or fabric scraps that exist in the supply chain, we have that same need for infrastructure. And if only 12% of what you throw in your blue bin to get recycled at your home ends up getting recycled on the things that we have been recycling for so long, it's a monumental activation energy to start building this infrastructure for apparel. When it comes to the supply chain, Patagonia, for example, shares finished goods facilities, so the cut and sew facilities I mentioned earlier, with a number of different brands, bigger ones, smaller ones. And these for us are the real hubs, the unlocks. If we can send a shipping container full of pristine, brand new fabric to the finished goods factory, let it get cut and sewn, and then collect the waste and then send it back to somewhere else to be recycled and turned into a durable good, that's us winning, but that's going to take a lot of work and coordination.
Thank you, Matt. That's so true. I wish we can hopefully someday build that infrastructure very soon. Lynda, you said you might have some insight on the infrastructure part.
Well, although there are some moves in Europe to this effect. You know, there are quota systems in the fashion industry, and it's not too far off the mark, I think, to imagine a quota system applied to what I like to call conspicuous production. So, you know, the business models, again, that we have, we produce garments and then we push them out there and then we advertise them, you know, so that people will buy them. And we're producing way more than anyone could possibly buy. And so there's lots of inventory waste. There's lots of goods at retail that aren't sold, as well as the waste that's post-consumer, as well as the waste that's in the, you know, in the production supply chain. And so just limiting the amount of production that companies can do is one area that I can imagine coming onto the radar. The other thing that I think companies should be held accountable for, because I hear a lot about whether it's recycling or reuse, and there's a lot of rental happening and so on and so forth, and it's all good, it's all really good. But what I'm hearing is that that part of the business is growing as a good thing, which it is a good thing. But what we should measure and hold companies accountable to do is the relationship between that part of the business that's growing and the reduction of the regular production, new production of garments, because that should be shrinking while this is growing. Otherwise, everything grows, right? Because resale and recycling is dependent on the waste of the old system. You want the old system to be shrinking. And that piece, the relationship between those two things, I don't think is being measured. And Joseph Stiglitz says, if you don't measure the right thing, or if you measure the wrong thing, you will do the wrong thing. And I really hope that the industry does not do the wrong thing. So I would say legislation on actual reductions, you know, like really holding people accountable for that.
So that's really a great lead in into the question of what opportunities do you see that have not been fully tackled that we could go after? Shelly, can we start with you if that's all right?
Sure. I feel like what excites me are opportunities that make recycling and upcycling easier. I feel like today recycling, it's not so easy, and sometimes it costs more. It costs more in terms of energy consumption to do the recycling than just not do it. And I just feel like that is too hard to force people to do. So I think innovations, for example, I recently read about this company. I mean, I shouldn't be recently reading about it because they've been around for a while, but there's this startup called Smart Stitches, and they actually create threads that dissolve at high temperature. And so that allows you to more quickly disassemble clothing. It's easier than to upcycle the clothes. It's easier to recycle. And I think something like that is quite interesting to me. Another thing is, I think we can actually think about design and design things that are not like very bespoke pieces, but can we actually design things to be like Lego pieces? That's something that my team and I have been thinking a lot about. And we actually tested this thing where we designed these very specific Lego pieces and we made them into 5 different pieces of clothing for 5 very different size people. And that's something that's exciting for us, because if your designs are really complex, let's say this is a shoe that has like 30 different parts, it's going to be really, really hard if you try to take it apart and like take it full circle, it's not really worth it. But if you can design something that is really minimal and the parts can easily be plugged into something else, even when demand changes, that is a much better way to think about circular economy. So I would say those are the two things I'm really excited about.
Thanks, Shelly. I mean, that is so true. I think that the big, just to go back to the hurdle really quickly, it's just taking things apart. How do you do that, especially when you put so many materials in one product? You know, it's impossible to take it apart and recycle it or upcycle it at that point because it's become so complicated. Do you have any thoughts, Matt, about opportunities?
Sure, and I'll just say that I love what Shelly's company is doing because fabric liabilities, that is fabrics that brands said they would buy and ended up not showing up for, are rampant in the industry, and they're first quality goods. You may not have a choice of color, of course, but to see them go into a high quality end use is really awesome. And for me, in addition to Shelly's great points about deconstruction, a lot of times it starts at the inception of the design. So if you're designing with the end in mind, of course, repairability comes into play. How am I going to take it apart? But you start thinking about what materials am I going to use that are compatible with existing or near future recycling systems or waste streams. That being said, some brands will take the approach that we're going to make everything all polyester because it will be recyclable someday, or we're going to make everything natural materials because they won't shed microfibers. And there's all kinds of traps when you have that kind of principled thinking. So of course, quality matters, and you don't want to take a product that otherwise would be high quality and last a long time, make a decision that makes it fall apart sooner or not meet those performance standards and end up with a worse problem. And of course, I just can't say enough, what's right under our nose is the cut scraps at the finished goods level. Any of those facilities where the cut scraps mysteriously disappear and get turned into insulation or burned in the dirtiest way possible, that's something we can address today. And it's not just Patagonia that's going to be able to do it. It's all of the different players in these facilities. So that's one that's immediately actionable.
Thanks, Matt. That's really great. And of course, Lynda, what's your perspective on potential opportunities?
Well, I think the wearers, of course, I think it's really untapped, and fashion in particular, it's really potent, and material culture is completely untapped by the industry that's really looking at supply chain issues, processing, material provenance. So I can give an example of, I'll give an example why it's important also to tap into wearers. First of all, at the moment, they're really sort of dismissed by activists as being sort of frivolous, loving fashion, or, rampant consumers. And they can be partners in new ideas, right? So with the craft of use, for example, if you're designing a sustainable garment, and if physical durability comes up, for example, if that garment is not in use for that long, then you can end up with a very durable, physically durable garment that's on a beach or in a landfill, where durability is not an asset, it becomes a liability. So connecting the actual qualities of the garment, the physical properties of the garment with use, with the wearer, intended use, is really important. So that's number one. And then I'll give an example of Unspun. That's a local company here in San Francisco. And they have people body scan, and their measurements go up into an algorithm that they use and make garments that are specifically for that person. And what they have found by doing this, that they found that people who have thought of themselves of having a sort of an imperfect body because nothing quite fits them, because things that are industrially produced are sort of to a efficiency pattern or whatever it might be, but it's not to their shape. Suddenly they're realizing, oh, actually, it's the industry sizing system that's at odds. It's not my body, it's not me. So they're really, meeting, again, the wearers where they are, developing bespoke for the masses. And it's completely changing the way that we think about garments and about experiencing fashion and delivering a fashion experience. And of course, when it's a bespoke piece, they keep it for longer. You know, so there's all these different ways, entry points, I think, and wearers is really untapped.
That's really great, Lynda. You've actually just gone into how can we engage the consumers, the wearers, to really keep this up. And there's no better way than to have it be bespoke, to have it be sort of customized to their own body type. I mean, of course they would keep it longer. That's amazing. So in terms going along that thread, how can we engage the consumers, our wearers, more to really be a part of the designing out waste process? Can we start with you, Shelly?
Yeah, so I think as a business, it's also our responsibility to make things as easy as possible for consumers. A company that always inspires me is Tesla, because I think about how in the automobile industry, you know, people who don't even care about sustainability, they want a Tesla because it's cool, because it's well designed, because it functions well. Whereas I think in the fashion industry today, people still a lot of times see sustainability in fashion as a compromise rather than something that's the part of the future. So I really think a lot with my team about how do we make things as easy as possible for consumers. And I think a part of that is actually not confusing them with messaging. I just feel like there's so many different messaging today around sustainability. And if there's anything I've learned on human behavior, is that if you want to kill a great transformation, you don't have to go against it. You just confuse people with all kinds of messaging, and then people will stop acting and stop doing anything. And I think unintentionally, a lot of brands in the industry are doing that. And so I think it's, for as a business, it's our responsibility to be very clear and to actually put stakes in the ground. And that's why in the beginning, we actually thought about how can we actually just put a stake in the ground and say zero waste, zero compromise. Because if we talked about we're going to be innovative in our textile, for example, that's like never ending. And how do you measure that? That's very unclear. And you actually might have textile that end up consuming more energy and more waste. So I think being really clear, that's one thing. Another thing is really think about how do you create designs that even if you take out the sustainability marketing message, people just want it. And it's well designed, it lasts, it's high quality. We actually did this survey recently, and something we found interesting was before, if you ask consumers what's the most expensive thing in your closet, a lot of times they might say that brand name piece that they bought that was really cool. But today, a lot of times they will say it's that investment piece that's super versatile, and it's not only fashion, it's also function. And so how do we create designs that solve problems for people that actually makes it really comfortable and functional at the same time, just as much as it looks good? So I think those are the things that as businesses we should do to get consumers on board.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Shelly. And Matt, what are your thoughts on that matter?
I'll try and add value to those great points that you've both already made. And I totally agree that the over certifying, the over branding of sustainability, you know, a hang tag with 10 different logos on it of all the different supply chain things that happened to build this piece ends up being a distraction, and albeit really confusing for the person, not just the person buying the product, but even for the person who has to sell it. And when it comes down to it, Yvon Chouinard told us a few years ago when we were having a conversation about what product do we market and where do we put our budgets, he told us, we don't have to talk about everything we do because our customer gives us their money to participate in what we do, and because they trust that we did the right thing. And that's really been our mission, is through all of these different decisions we have to make. Some of them are at odds with each other, consumerism versus making more product versus saving the planet. How do we choose to do the right thing in an authentic way? And I think what's really important, and I kind of, there's an analogy with the food industry, because what I observed is that around 10 years ago, there was this revolution that happened, and people started asking where their food came from. And they learned that it didn't just come from the supermarket. And I think that's the revolution that we need to go through here, where we are telling our customers, ask me where this was made, show me who made it, show me the waste source that you're claiming to be the recycled input for this, like prove me wrong. You know, a wise lawyer once said, well, how do you know? And I think those are the questions that our consumers need to start asking of us. And we need to do the back end work, of course, to have great answers too.
Wow, thank you, Matt. I mean, that really is a great connection, connecting it to better food. I mean, we should have better clothing. Absolutely. Focus on that and how do we get there? And I think you guys have posed some amazing insight into different paths that we could take in terms of opportunities and in terms of engaging our customer. I wish we had more time. It's been such an engaging conversation, but I have to say this was amazing. And I just want to say a big thank you to our speakers today. There was some great insights, and all I can say is let's keep this conversation going. And to our audience, thank you for listening in on this discussion, and please look out for our next event. Thank you so much, everyone.